Miriam Margolyes has at last written a memoir. You'd be expecting an extremely good time with Miriam Margolyes' memoir, and she doesn't disappoint. Conceived in an air raid, brought up in a nice Jewish home with a charismatic mother, Miriam Margolyes became the naughtiest girl at Oxford High School. Her years at Cambridge University introduced her to the works of Charles Dickens and to acting. And as a natural show-off, Miriam loved being on the stage, and she developed into a mesmerising actor. In every film or TV series Miriam is in, she makes a powerful and direct connection with the audience. There's a whole lot of raw feeling and intellect and a kind of comedic danger moving around the stage and the screen with her. I find you watch her every movement because you just don't know what she's going to do next. I can't believe that Miriam has turned 80, neither can she. Her memoir of her brilliant, raucous and passionate life is called This Much Is True. How lovely to have you back on the program, Miriam. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
What's it been like for you writing a memoir during this horrible pandemic?
Really terrifying. I think that writing the memoir is much more frightening than COVID for me, because I was able to run to Italy to my little Tuscan farmhouse and just bed down there and write. I don't think I could have done it if I'd been in London. I would have been able to in Australia because it's quiet there, but it was a difficult experience.
Did you find there were a whole lot of lost memories that bubbled up to the surface in the process of writing this?
Yes, I did, and I also connected with a lot of people who would remember things that I didn't, and that was lovely. Old school friends, people I'd been at university with. It just made my life seem richer, because when you are separated from everybody, as I was because of COVID, it's a bit too solitary for me. I'm not a solitary person. And I wanted my book to be as bubbly as my life was. And I hope that it is.
You're descended from a family of Eastern European Jewish people who migrated to Britain. How close are you to the faith and to the culture of Jewishness, Miriam?
I'm very close to the culture. I'm not close at all to the faith. I have no belief in the same way that my parents certainly did, but I'm intensely aware of being Jewish, and I intend to make everybody else intensely aware of it too, and that has always been the case. But I don't believe in God. I believe in good and evil, and that we have a choice. And it's not an easy subject to talk about. I find religion much more embarrassing than, politics or sex, say.
Do you think you have a soul? Do you think people have souls?
I do. I do believe in souls. I don't believe in an afterlife. I think it all stops when you die. But I believe that there is a certain thing inside us which makes us who we are, and that we have to guard and honour. And I would call that my soul.
You write in your book about your grandfather, on your father's side, who started out as a peddler and then was able to buy his own jewellery shop in Glasgow. Tell me the story of what happened when your father was enlisted to serve in the British Army during World War One.
Yes, well, they were living in Glasgow, and Daddy got a scholarship to Glasgow University, and they were all obviously thrilled because he was the first member of the family to do so. And then one morning came the papers, the draft call to go to France. It would have been in 1918, I suppose. And my grandfather, who was a softly spoken Belarusian who'd come to Scotland as a refugee in 1870, he loved my father. He ran a jewellery shop, of course, and he rang the commander of the 4th Battalion Glasgow Highland Light Infantry, made an appointment to go and see him that afternoon. And he went and knocked at the door, and the soldier said, "Come in." And he went in, this little shy Jewish man. I never knew him, but I knew what he was like because my father had told me. And he said, "Thank you very much for seeing me. I appreciated it very much, but I have something to ask from you." And the soldier said, "All right, go ahead, what is it?" And he said, my son has just won a scholarship to university to be a doctor. But he has received your call-up papers to join your regiment. And I beg you, please, to give me the life of my son and strike his name from the draft. I beg you, please. But I cannot ask for something so big without also giving something. And he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out in the palm of his hand a diamond. He said, "This is the most valuable thing I possess, except for my son. I would like you to take it in exchange, please, for the life of my son." And he gave it to him, and the soldier took it. And my father was spared. And here I am.
And here you are. Did your father tell you that story? And if he did, how did he tell it to you?
He told it to me very simply. And I put it in dramatic terms because I'm very emotional, like my mother, and very dramatic. And I could see that it was an amazing story. And when I was in Australia, I put it in my show, The Importance of Being Miriam, and two Scottish women were leaving the auditorium, and I heard them say, "You know, that story about her father and the soldier, couldn't be true. No Scottish officer would dream of taking a bribe."
But he did. After he became a doctor then, your father, having sort of being of that generation where your grandfather had lifted himself out of the shtetl into Glasgow, having the shop, and your father becomes a kind of respectable doctor. What kind of a life do you think your father wanted for himself?
Oh, I think he wanted an intensely conventional future. He wanted to marry, to be with my mother when he had found her, to have children, and live in a comfortable, very domestic way, that nothing would change and life would go on like that. He was profoundly conventional.
It's amazing to think that he's your father. And your mother, how different was she to him?
Oh, she was totally different, completely different. You couldn't imagine, chalk and cheese. I don't think she was unconventional in the sense that I am. I mean, she would never have allowed the language that I sometimes use on television. She would be appalled at that, because she wanted to be considered a lady. She was from a lower social class, in a way, from my father, because she had left school at 14. She'd never been to university. She hadn't been educated. But she had a fine brain and a keen understanding of humanity. She was a great manipulator, and she was an enthusiastic social being. She enjoyed being a hostess, having people come round. Daddy didn't like that at all. He would, often retreat to the study and read or smoke his pipe or something. And she wanted to be in the thick of things, and Daddy didn't. So I suppose, to be honest, I'm much more like my mother than I am my father.
Yes, it's a fascinating portrait you paint of her. She's so kind of fabulous and over the top, yet very, very, very big on good form at the same time. You say that she bound you to her with emotional hoops of steel. Do you hear her voice in your head?
To my great sadness, because she lost the power of speech when she had her stroke, I no longer hear her voice. I can't remember it, and that is a huge sadness to me. She had I suppose, a London twang, but I just can't hear it anymore. And I wish I could, because it would have been wonderful just to revisit her in my mind in that way. But I see her face and her eyes sparkling, and sometimes a look of rage on it, because she was prone to great rages. She was a tempestuous creature.
She married your father, a nice Jewish doctor. Was this a love match or a search for security, given that you write she was anxious about her status in society as a middle-class person?
Well, Mummy told me that she did not love Daddy when they got married. She wanted to marry a doctor, and there he was, and he was very handsome. Looked a bit like Charlie Chaplin, with wonderful eyes and a beautiful hair, but she didn't love him. She might have fancied him, although Mummy wasn't terribly sexual, I don't think. She didn't ever seem to be very sexual. But she was a social climber. She wanted more than the background that she came from, lower middle class southeast London, her father a second-hand furniture salesman. She wanted more out of life. And I wish she'd lived to know that I got more out of life than she did, because of her.
Yes, you say she bound you to her with emotional hoops of steel. How did she do that?
Just by the force of her personality, the power of her love. It was an all-consuming love. You see, she hadn't wanted to have children. My parents were married for 11 years before I was born. She was frightened of childbirth because cousins in South Africa had died in childbirth. And that was true. I found out when I was doing my genealogical research that was true. But, she found she was pregnant, and she tried to have an abortion, and it was against the law, so she couldn't. But once I was born, once she held me, she never let me go. She just loved me with all her heart. And I know Daddy did too, but he didn't express it in the same way, and I knew I was loved. I never doubted it all my life for 1 second.
Well, you arrived in 1941, probably at the darkest days of World War II. What do you think it meant for your Jewish parents to bring a child into the world when it looked like Hitler might be running the world?
I can't imagine how desperately insecure they must have felt, because they did think, as I believe a lot of English people did, that Hitler would win, that he would overrun the British Isles. And it could so easily have happened. We were very lucky that we had Churchill, for example, instead of the buffoon that we have now. But it was a very insecure time. Their house was bombed. They had to get on a train with whatever they had on their backs, and they went to Oxford because their car was being repaired there. That was the only reason. And I think they also had heard that Hitler wouldn't bomb Oxford because he intended it to be his capital after his invasion of Britain. But what they went through in those early days, I cannot imagine. And, of course, they survived. But the Jews 100 miles away in Europe, they did not survive. So they never complained. They were lucky, and I think they knew it.
You say that everything you did fascinated them. You were the much longed-for child, the much-loved child. You say, I always had their undivided attention and their all-consuming, unconditional adoration, which is completely lovely. Do you think that when you do get applause and praise as an actor, that sort of reminds you of that flame of parental love?
I don't know that I think of it when I get applause. I mean, I try to be grown up about it all now, and I think, well, people are applauding me because I've done a good job and they're pleased. So I don't necessarily link it with my parents' love, but I think my parents' love and support gave me the confidence to go on the stage and be an actress, despite the fact that I was short, fat, unbeautiful, no neck, didn't move particularly well. The auspices were not great. But I had that confidence, and that's what my parents gave me.
Your mum, you're right, that she did all of her housework completely in the nude. And certainly it's a common theme in your memoir that you will completely disrobe to enjoy the shocked reaction it provokes in people. You have that much in common. With your mother, though, such a respectable person doing her housework in the nude, do you think she enjoyed the reaction that it provoked in house guests or whoever else was around the house at the time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think she thought about that. She wanted to get the housework done quickly and efficiently, and then she'd have her bath. She was a very clean person, but she wanted the house to be clean, and that was just how it happened. I didn't realise that it was terribly strange. Daddy didn't like it terribly. He sort of disappeared. Well, I think he'd probably gone to surgery by then, but when I told people about it afterwards, they were all utterly amazed. And so I thought I would include it in the book, because it sort of showed another side of Mummy.
You were a model momentarily for the great British artist, Augustus John. you posed nude for him. Was that your idea or his idea, Miriam?
Oh, it was totally my idea. I saw the programme Face to Face with John Freeman interviewing him. I can't remember when it was, but I was about 17. Yes, I was 17. And I just thought he was heaven. Wonderful personality, mischievous, attractive, knowledgeable about art. I just thought he was gorgeous. And so I wrote to him. I didn't ask my parents. I just wrote and said, I'm 17 and I saw your programme and I'd like to model for you and I won't charge you. I think that was probably what got him. Anyway, his lady at the time, Dorelia, she rang my parents. She was very sort of like that, you know, very sort of old-fashioned, smart voice. And Mummy was bewitched by higher class people. She just was. It's one of her faults. And when this lady rang and said, my husband would like to paint on, do you mind? It's a sketch, only a sketch. Would you mind if it was in the nude? Because that is required. And Mummy said, yes, I don't know why. I can't imagine how she allowed it. But she did, and they took me there. I practiced taking off my clothes.
So I would do
it elegantly. Right. Yes, in my bedroom at home. I just wore knickers. I didn't have a bra. And I just wore a dress that was easy to extricate myself from. And a pair of knickers. And then I just took off my dress and took off my knickers. And there I was. And the really unexpected thing was that Augustus John looked at me. He said, very nice, very nice. Your skin takes the light. And I thought that was lovely. And then he said, climb that ladder. And I had to climb a ladder. While he looked at me going up and down. And that was slightly surreal. But he was lovely. I mean, there was nothing inappropriate happening. He just wanted me to climb up and down.
For an adult lesbian, you're actually terribly unshocked by dirty old men, or dirty young men for that matter, it seems, Miriam.
Well, I'm not shocked as long as I'm in charge. And when I did the sexual things that I did with various old men and young men, I felt I was in charge. I don't want to be pinned against a wall against my will. I would hate that, and I would, knee them in the groin very hard if that happened. It never did. So I just felt I was doing what I wanted to do, and luckily they liked it.
So you got into Cambridge University, and that seems to have been such a formative experience for you, as you would expect it to be. What do you think Cambridge gave you that's never left you?
It gave me what my mother so badly wanted me to have, the ability to talk to anyone about anything. And I do have that, I believe. And that's what an education gives you. And it gave me a complete joy in the literature of my language. English literature, I think, is the greatest of all literatures. And I was able to fully immerse myself in it. And I had the benefit of great teachers, Queenie Leavis and Frank Leavis, and it was a great joy to me. So I'm certainly still, at my advanced age, a Leavisite and a lover of English literature.
That photo of you in Footlights, you look amazing in that photo. You look very dangerous for a start, and you look slightly demonic almost. And you make those men around you look wet. They look very wet around you and not very interesting. You were treated horribly by the other members of Footlights, John Cleese, Graham Chapman, and Bill Oddie from the Goodies, I think. Was that because they didn't think a woman could be funny, or that they didn't think a woman should be funny, Miriam?
Minor public school boys, naturally anti-Semitic, misogynistic in those early days, and they didn't like the competition of a woman who felt confident enough to match them on the stage. I think actually that they were, in their own way, geniuses. I don't know if John still is, but they weren't very nice people. And that has to be acknowledged. And what they did to me was just awful. And that's why I'm calling them out. Now, 60 years later, people say to me, what's the matter with you? You should have forgotten that. It's over. Don't hark back to it. Well, I haven't forgiven and I haven't forgotten. and they should never do it again, and it should never be done to any performer again.
Did any of them apologise later?
Tim Brooke-Taylor, bless him, he was a nice man, and when he got his OBE, I wrote to congratulate him, and he very sweetly wrote back, and I then told him about what had happened to me. I didn't know whether he'd been aware of it, being in the cast, that nobody had spoken to me, that I would do my bits on stage, received with acclaim, and then go off stage to be met with complete blankness, stony silence. Nobody spoke to me. And I wasn't asked to the cast party. And he apologised. And he said he hadn't realised that was happening. And maybe that is so. But he was actually a very nice man. And he's dead. And I revere his memory. So there it is. It's over. And I've spoken my piece about it. And I feel better for having done so.
Amazingly, I discover in your book that you were the first person, certainly the first woman, to drop the F-bomb on British television. And this was done in the early 1960s. How did this come about, Miriam?
Oh, you're dredging up the most miserable bits of my life. That's awful.
I'm coming to the good bits soon, I promise.
I said the F word on television because I got a question wrong in University Challenge, and it just slipped out. It was beeped out or didn't appear in the final transmission. I'm not proud of it, but it's a completely human response, I think. I don't remember what the question was, in case you're asking me, but I know Bamber Gascoigne remembered that it happened, because quite recently I met him again and he remembered.
The idea that it happened in University Challenge in front of Bamber Gascoigne is marvellous, I think. After university, you performed for some years in BBC radio drama. Radio drama. What is so particularly lovely about radio for you?
Radio is a wonderful medium because there is no filter between your voice and the listener's ear. You go straight in. I love it. I hope I will end my career in radio. That's where I belong. It's a delicious thrill to reach your listener so directly without any interference, just from me to you.
There's a heavenly intimacy in radio. Do you think that's made you a better actor overall?
Oh, yes, I do. I think radio is a great teacher. And in the days when microphones allowed you to look into your fellow actor's eyes, as we did across the microphone, that was a great thrill. Nowadays, engineering and technical brilliance has stopped us from doing that. We work side by side. That's much harder. I like looking into the person's eyes that I'm talking to.
There's an Australian comedian named Sue-Ann Post, and Sue-Ann told me that she grew up in a Mormon family in Sydney, and the moment she realised she was a lesbian was when she was reading a Mormon book on degenerate sexuality, and there was a description of lesbianism, and she went, "Oh, that's me." How about you, Miriam?
I don't know that lady, but it would be fun to talk to her. When did I really realise? I think it was inevitable when I was picked up on the tube by a complete stranger. We got off the tube together, and I took her to my flat in Lancaster Gate, where I lived at the time. And that's where it has sort of started. I think that was the moment when somebody else recognised me as one.
Was there a sense of things falling into place?
Yes, I'd always fancied... I fancied Doris Day, always, but I didn't know that had a name. I thought that was just being a fan.
It sounds like your first meeting with your very long-term partner, Heather, was quite devastating, and amazingly devastating. It was like the absolute thunderbolt. Is that how it was, Miriam?
Yes, it was for me. I don't know if it... I never asked her if it was for her. Isn't that funny? She is Australian, and that's why I am now Australian. I had heard about her from Manning Clark's daughter, Katerina, who was at school with me when they came for a sabbatical to London. Katerina and I became friends. Katerina then went back to Australia. Then she got a scholarship to Yale, as did Heather. They were both from Canberra. They became friends. Katerina's straight, Heather isn't. And when I wrote to Katerina and said, I've become a lesbian, she said, oh, I know one of those. And she said, we're coming over on a research trip, and I said, oh, well, I must meet this Heather. And I did, and that was absolutely it. I went to the pictures with her in a big group of Australians, and I just looked at her the whole time. She was quite uncomfortable, actually. It was the charge of the Light Brigade, and there was all that pounding going on screen. And I was ignoring that and just looking at her. And she thought, what's the matter with this woman?
Yeah. Your first, unofficial date was to watch The Charge of the Light Brigade, and you spent the whole movie staring intently, lasciviously at Heather. That's beautiful.
Podcast, broadcast, and online. You're listening to Conversations with Richard Fidler. Hear more conversations anytime on the ABC Listen app or go to abc.net.au/conversations.
So you met Heather and fell madly, passionately in love, and you've been together ever since for 53 years now. But this meant you had to come out to your parents. And you say you regret doing that. Why do you regret coming out to your parents?
I regret telling my mother because it broke her hopes and she couldn't bear it. She couldn't take it. Not long afterwards, she had a stroke, and then she had another stroke, which was quite devastating. And for 7.5 years, she couldn't move, really, or speak, apart from a few phrases. And I felt and feel responsible. People say, no, she would have had a stroke. It wasn't to do with that. And maybe that's true. But I think there's a kind of indulgence that gay people have that everybody's got to know because it's easier for them, maybe. And I don't believe that. I think some people can't take it, can't bear it. And why should we inflict pain and distress on the people we love? So just shut up and keep it to yourself. That's what I think.
That would have been a very high price for you to pay, and for Heather to pay as well, surely. You'd also be having those constant meetings when your mother would be saying, oh, when are you going to get settled down, marry a nice boy and have babies, give me grandchildren? That would have been hard. Could you have really done all that, Miriam?
No, I couldn't, and it didn't. I mean, after Mummy knew, it didn't stop her. I mean, when she couldn't speak, she would just grab my arm and say, get married, get married, get married, in this terrible strangled voice. It was awful. And, I think I should have just gone on and been duplicitous with them. But Mummy had brought me up to tell her everything, and she always said, we have a fortress. Our family is a fortress. And within the fortress, we stay together. And so I was schooled to open everything up to her. And I wish I hadn't.
Well, what if you're trapped in that fortress?
Yes, it can be a trap. But I broke out of it. And in the doing of that, I hurt the person I loved the most. I don't know that Heather and I would have survived if Mummy had known about her. You see, she didn't know about Heather because I hadn't met Heather at that time. She knew about me. That was when I was in Leicester. That's where I started, an affair with a girl when I was in Rep at Leicester. A lesbian in Leicester. Perhaps I should have called my autobiography that. Actually, I was going to call it Dyke Overflowing, but the august publisher, John Murray and Company, they published Charles Darwin, Lord Byron and Jane Austen. And I think they thought Dyke Overflowing was not a title they wanted in their catalogue.
Well, if this one sells well enough, maybe they'll let you do a part two. I don't know. I think, if I may be so presumptuous, Miriam, is to say, I think the most thing that's so unsettling about you as an actor, and funny about you as an actor as well, is your absolute authenticity and a sense of acting is inherently an artifice, but there's something kind of very raw and powerful and authentic about you. Tell me how you do what you do, if you can. What steps you take once you're given a script to go from the page to the stage or to the screen. How do you build up your character in your mind? How do you do that, Miriam?
I was never at a drama school, so I never was taught a way of acting. Whatever I've learnt just through doing it and through thinking about it. But nobody ever taught me or showed me the way. And for me, it is totally instinctive. I read a script and I connect with certain parts of the character that I'm playing. And slowly I try to build up the link between me and that character, so that at the end of the rehearsal period, through the input of the director and in my conversation with my other actors, my colleagues feed me and feed my vision, as I hope I feed theirs. And gradually, the image that I have of the character and of myself, they merge, they become one.
I've seen you on stage in Dickens' Women, and some of the characters in there are slightly monstrous, but you play them with a streak of sympathy for them, I think anyway. Do you need to have that if you're going to play any character, no matter how monstrous or wicked the character might be? Is there a part of you that must love that character in order to play that character?
Yes, I think so. I don't think that you should comment morally on the character that you're playing. You mustn't indicate, I am a bad person, because I don't think people do that in real life. Probably Boris Johnson doesn't think he's a bad person to himself, or other members of that awful Tory party. They probably think they're probably quite decent fellows to themselves. So I think if you are trying to produce on stage a real person so that people can believe in that character, you can't make comments and say, look, I'm actually a horrible person, because people don't do that. So you do have to have some insight and sympathy into the person you're playing.
I interviewed Brenda Blethyn some years ago, and
I love her. She's gorgeous.
Too. Yes, she's a wonderful actor. She told me that it's a really commonplace thing amongst the most accomplished actors you can think of, that still get the fear before going on stage, even in their 70s. Is that you, Miriam, too?
Totally. I'm terrified. My stage management will tell you I have to have a bucket in the wings to be sick into, because I'm so frightened. And the reason for that is because the expectation is high. As you get older and people think you're good, they think you're going to be good on stage, and they're expecting you to delight them and surprise them and whatever else we offer.
You went into therapy for a while, you're right, after you'd had a brief adulterous affair, you called it, and Heather and you separated for 6 months. And Margaret Branch was brought in to be your therapist. She called showbiz people talented toddlers. How did she help you, Miriam?
She made me more reflective and in a way more confident. She was very critical of Mummy, and that was difficult for me because I couldn't imagine being critical of Mummy, but she made me. And she would say, what about you? What about you? What about you? And then you would have to say what you were thinking and how you were processing what had happened to you in the day and in the weeks. And she would say, don't be glib, don't be glib, don't be glib.
There's an extraordinary revelation in your book that's had a fair bit of media coverage, which was that she did confess to you that at the insistence of the brilliant British cellist Jacqueline du Pré, who had been suffering very severely from multiple sclerosis, that they'd had a pact whereby Margaret Branch would help her die once she was requested to do so, and she told you that she went ahead and did this and that she'd given her a lethal injection, which was, and done this quite surreptitiously, and asked you to keep the secret and until she had died as well. Why did you tell that story? Why did you want to tell that story in your book?
I suppose I told it because she'd said, don't tell anyone till I'm dead. And she has been dead a while. And I felt it was such an important story that it shouldn't die with me. I felt that this was an opportunity to tell it. And I don't regret it. I didn't ask permission from any of her family. I don't know if any of her family survive, actually. And I gather that Daniel Barenboim, Jacqueline Dupre's ex-husband, was very scornful and said, it's unverifiable. And he's quite right. It is unverifiable, unless Margaret told that story to other people. I don't know if she did. And if she did, well, then to some extent it's verifiable, but it was certainly told to me, and I knew that she'd been in the Special Operations Executive during the war, that she'd been trained to kill, and she was telling the truth to me, and I feel that it should be known. I think it's probably the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me.
Like I said, I saw you on stage performing Dickens' Women, which was wonderful. You started reading him when you were 11, and then you tore through all 15 novels. What did you love about Dickens' work, Miriam?
I think I'm a bit like him in some ways, and I responded to that energy and passion that he is able to show in his books. Particularly also, I love just the brilliance of his prose. I think he's the greatest writer that we have alongside Shakespeare, greater than any other novelist. And his own life is so extraordinary. The gap between the early poverty and the great wealth. He was the greatest celebrity America had ever seen when he went over there. And the secretness of his love affair with Ellen Ternan, which Claire Tomlin wrote about so brilliantly in The Invisible Woman. I just find him compelling, the most interesting, remarkable, gifted man in my world. And I wish that I could have met him. He would be top of my list to meet if I could choose anybody.
There are characters in his books that are enormously cruel, and I used to think that that cruelty that he depicted came out of his kind of revulsion to that cruelty, and I suppose it did, but it also came from cruelty that was within him, and you showed that on stage. He did have reserves of cruelty in him. And I was thinking of this when I saw Hannah Gadsby's show, Nanette, and she talked about, why do we revere Picasso so much when he was such a pig of a human being? But the truth is, Picasso's paintings are still mind-blowingly brilliant. And there we are. He was a pig of a human being, but there is the work, and maybe that's true for Dickens as well. What do you think of that contrast between the monster artist and the work that he creates?
Yes, I agree with Hannah Gadsby, whom incidentally I revere. I think that it is an eternal paradox between the man and the work. Would we rather that Tolstoy had been a good husband, or that he wrote War and Peace, and the same with Dickens and Picasso, and all the other monsters who have given us great works? A great writer is not necessarily a great man. Life isn't always simple, is it? You know that.
No. I think you have to have those two ideas in your head at the same time as you read the book or look at the painting. I think that's the trick, isn't it?
Yes, well, Dickens, I'm not a student of Picasso, although I admire him, but Dickens, I feel I know, and I know that he put a lot of himself and his real life into his work, and it shows. He was Fagin, he was Squeers, he was the monster, but he was also a brilliant, gifted, and kindly man.
You worked with Barbara Streisand on her movie Yentl, and you got on very well with her, you're right. And that was made in what was then Czechoslovakia. Tell me what happened when your plane touched down at the airport in Prague when you were with her, and how she got out of that plane. Please, Miriam.
It's a rather sweet story. It was the first film, Yentl, that had actually been made in Czechoslovakia since, well, I don't know when, the first American film. So everybody was tremendously excited. There was a huge crowd on the tarmac at the airport in Prague when we arrived. And she looked out of the window and saw the crowd, and she trembled with fright. She was scared. She didn't want to leave the plane, and she said, you go, Miriam. I'm staying here, you go. And I said, Barbara, are you nuts? They're not interested in me. They want to see you. Go out and delight them, for goodness sake. And so I saw her gather herself, become Barbara Streisand, and opened the door. The door probably was already open, and she had been cowering behind it. And she stepped forth onto the steps, going down into the crowd, and she was Barbara Streisand. She had become the Streisand they wanted to see. And she did it for them, and that's what's the cost of being a star, I suppose.
I'm sure that star recognition is what she desperately, desperately wanted for years until she had it. What do you think?
I think she did want it, but she didn't have to wait very long. She was a star at a very young age. In her early 20s, she became a star, and deservedly so. She is the epitome of star. But she's also scared of herself and scared of the public. Very, very shy, genuinely very shy.
What did Heather say when you spoke to her about this and told her that story about how Streisand sort of, I don't know, put on her stardom like a cloak or something to wear it outside when she got outside the plane? What did Heather say about all that?
Well, Heather actually said, Heather is a professor of Indonesian history and knows Indonesia and Southeast Asia very well. And she said there is an acceptance of that very thing in Southeast Asia, that people do prepare themselves to leave their homes. They gather themselves. And it's called, the word that they use is a Dutch word, which is a drempelvrees. And it means fear of the threshold. And that's what Streisand showed, and what is apparently something that people are aware of in Southeast Asia. And whether we do it here, yeah, I think we do. Because sometimes you see women, just before they leave their homes, they look in the hall mirror and just pat the back of their head and purse their lips to see how the lipstick's going. It does happen.
Two of my favourite roles of yours are quite similar. There's the role you played in The Age of Innocence, and a similar role as a kind of a bedridden aunt in the BBC production of Vanity Fair. But when being in The Age of Innocence, working with Martin Scorsese, why did he want English actors in particular to play these 19th century upper-class Manhattanites?
I asked him why he was doing the book, a brilliant book by Edith Wharton, and he said he was interested in brutality. And I think he thought that English actors are able to show scorn and derision and evince a kind of cruelty in the most polite social environment, with a sneer, a cut, when you pretend somebody is invisible. But it's something that comes with English classical theatre training, that we can make people feel small because of our English culture so embedded in class. And maybe Americans don't find that so easy. And I believe that is why he used such a lot of English actors, and I'm terribly glad he used me.
Yes,
because it was a highlight of my career, and I won the BAFTA Best Supporting Actress that year.
One of the great myths, though, of American cinema is that Americans are natural and authentic and English are uptight and can't ever talk about what they think or what they feel, and whereas Americans, these things come more naturally to them, that they're more earthy. Tell me how you managed to pep up the crew one day on set, very early on in the filming of The Age of Innocence. Miriam?
You're trying to perpetuate the myth of me being outrageous, aren't you?
Well, it's all there in your book, isn't it? It's all there in black and white.
I think it is. I'm telling the truth. Well, it was on Age of Innocence, and it was the first wardrobe tests. I was the last character to be seen at the end of a very long day. I walked in, I could see that the crew were just exhausted and not particularly thrilled. And so I thought, I've got to give them a present. And I said, thank you, chaps, very much for staying to the end for me. I think I'm going to give you a little treat. And I lifted up my top and showed them my breasts, untrammelled by a brassiere. And, of course, it cheered them up, because breasts cheer people up. They're not threatening. So, gave them a good laugh, really.
A big theme in your book is friendship for you. You've got friends that you've still got friends today who you went to school with way back when in Oxford, when you were just starting out. There's a wonderful story by David Sedaris, who wrote a story called Kookaburra about his time in Australia, and there's a conversation he has in it. It's an essay about what you do in your life and how you get balance. And the conversation goes, he's told that, imagine your life as being like a 4-burner stove. And one of the burners on that stove represents your family. One is your friends. The third one is your health. And the fourth of the burners is your work. And the gist of the story is that in order to be successful, you have to cut off one of your burners. And in order to be really successful, you have to cut off 2. What do you think that is for you?
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to cut off anything. I'm sorry, I don't accept that at all. I wish David Sedaris all the best, but leave me out of that.
All right, all 4 burners all the time.
Yes.
What do you think, though, about that, having old friends, the importance of old friends, the people who've been witness to your young self and all your young foolishness, Miriam?
Well, I just have the friends that I love and know me well, and they're important to me, more important than anything except Heather. I love them, and I need them.
You've met the Queen, and you don't get on with her.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I hardly met her, and I was just an idiot, and she told me to shut up, and I don't blame her. Well, she didn't say it in those words. She just said, be quiet, quite crisply. And I don't blame her. I think I come out of that story very badly, actually.
But how do you get on with Charles, though? How do you like him?
I just love him, personally speaking, and I can't say that he's a friend. I know him, and I've met him many times, and every time I've met him, I've thought what an impressive, decent, honourable, thoughtful man he is. And the same for Camilla. I just respect him, really respect him. And I think the horrible things people write and believe, the nonsense people believe, is just shocking. The way we treat well-known people in the press, I mean, I've had a few tussles, but nothing to compare to what the royal family go through. And this programme, this new programme that they're all watching, well, I won't watch it. I won't see people's lives, real people, living people's lives, made into soap opera and light entertainment. It's cruel. They can't answer back. He is an extremely impressive man, and bless him, I'm very fond of him.
You became a citizen, an Australian citizen, in 2013, and I know you do love Australia, and Heather comes from here as well. Do you feel frustrated with Australia as much as you love it, Miriam?
I love this wonderful country that has allowed me to become a citizen. I just want it to be better than it is at the moment. And I hold the government of Australia deeply responsible, as I do the English government, for the mess that Australia's in. and the way that the current Prime Minister cowers in the name of religion and doing the things he does, he should be thoroughly ashamed. I make no bones about it. I may never work in Australia again because of my remarks, but that's what I think. And most people that I know think the same. People who admire the Australia of today, the attitude towards migrants, the closing of sympathy towards people from another place. What's the matter with you? Come on. Let's be really Christian. They talk about Christianity, and Jesus was a fabulous chap. Let's be kind to people. That's the most important thing.
Now that you're in your 80s, are you enjoying the serenity and wisdom, or do you just hate it?
I don't like being 80 at all. I've got some health problems. So far my mind seems okay, although others might disagree. But I would rather be young and able to do all the things. I don't move as fast. I want to dart about, not limp about.
You're still with Heather after all those years, ever since that night. Ever since that night you went to see the Charge of the Light Brigade with her and stared at her all throughout the movie. They say that you feel something like safety with the one you love. You feel safe with them. Is that right for you?
I don't know if I would call it safety, because we can be nasty to each other. We bicker, and it's not just an untempestuous sea. There are ups and downs, and it's a full relationship. But there's no one on earth that I'd rather be with.
Miriam, thank you so much. I can't wait till we can do this face-to-face once again when this bloody pandemic is over. I've so enjoyed our conversation, as always. Thank you so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Miriam Margolyes' memoir is called This Much Is True. I'm Richard Fidler. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of Conversations, then have a look at our playlist here and choose another episode to listen to. Or you can follow Conversations on the ABC Listen app and create your own playlist so you can listen to us anywhere, anytime that suits you.